Since 1932, Thailand has lived under the shadow of the gun. The nation that once embraced a bloodless transition from absolute monarchy to constitutional rule has since endured more military coups than any other country in the modern world. From generals in darkened command rooms to tanks on city streets, each coup has promised stability but delivered fear, suppression, and silence. Behind every uniform was a vision of power unchecked, and under every boot lay the bruised bodies of protesters, activists, and dreamers. This is not just a history of politics. This is a history of broken promises, disappearing voices, and crushed hopes. From the 1932 coup to the present day, the cycle of junta rule has left a trail of censorship, mass detentions, massacres, and impunity. This is the story Thailand's rulers want forgotten, but we will remember. Welcome to the true history of Thailand's military coups. Part 1. The Seeds of Control. From Revolution to Regression, 1932 to 1957. The year was 1932. In the still darkness before dawn, a group of military and civilian elites, known as the People's Party, or Kena Rotsudon, launched what they termed a bloodless revolution. Their goal, to end the absolute monarchy and usher in a new age of constitutional democracy. For a moment, it seemed like a new dawn. King Projitapok, Rama VII, accepted the change without violence. A constitution was drafted, a parliament was formed. But democracy in Thailand, from its very beginning, was fragile, constantly walking a tightrope above the ambitions of the military. Within a year, cracks formed. Power struggles erupted among the revolutionaries. The military, led by figures like Colonel Phibin Songkram, saw the instability as a sign. The people weren't ready for democracy, and the army would need to guide the nation forward by force if necessary. In 1933, a counter-revolution known as the Boaradit Rebellion broke out, led by royalists who attempted to restore the monarchy's power. The military crushed the rebellion swiftly, but it came at a cost. From then on, the military was no longer a guardian of democracy, it became its master. By the late 1930s, Phibin had become prime minister and ruled Thailand like a dictator under the pretense of nationalism. He modeled his regime on fascist Italy and Nazi Germany. Propaganda flourished. Political opponents were jailed or executed. The press was tightly controlled. The slogan of the day, nation, religion, king. But in truth, it was the army that ruled. Phibin changed the country's name from Siam to Thailand, reinforcing a narrow ethnic Thai identity and marginalizing minorities. His regime initiated Thaification policies, suppressing regional cultures and Muslim communities in the south. Democracy was nowhere to be found. Then came World War II. In 1941, Japan invaded Thailand. But rather than fight, Phibin allied with the Axis powers. Thailand became a Japanese client state. Resistance groups formed in secret, and when the war ended, the military regime fell temporarily. Civilian politicians took power in the late 1940s, only to find themselves surrounded by enemies in uniform. In 1947, the military struck again. Tanks rolled into Bangkok. Politicians were arrested. Another constitution was scrapped. The military returned to power, cloaking itself in patriotism and anti-communism. The 1950s brought yet another strongman, Field Marshal Sarat Thanapura. Sarat seized power in a coup in 1957 with American backing. His regime marked a new era of militarized modernization. Corruption was rampant. Civil rights were trampled. But the West looked the other way because Sarat was staunchly anti-communist. Under his rule, Thailand became a key Cold War ally. The US flooded the country with aid. CIA operatives worked hand in hand with Thai generals. In return, the generals ensured that leftist movements were crushed without mercy. The press was muzzled. Dissidents disappeared. Torture became routine. But because Sarat built roads and hospitals, many in the elite called him a benevolent dictator. That label masked the suffering of thousands. Sarat ruled until his death in 1963, but his legacy lived on. His protege, Thanom Kittikachurn, carried the military torch into the 1960s, and with the Vietnam War spilling over into Southeast Asia, Thailand once again played host to foreign troops and covert operations. The price was national sovereignty and domestic peace. US airbases dotted the countryside. The army grew richer, but the people grew restless. Student movements emerged. Labor strikes multiplied. Farmers protested exploitation, and the generals responded with iron fists. Part 2. The Age of Absolute Orders, Coups, Crackdowns, and Silenced Voices. After the 1947 coup restored military dominance, Thailand entered an era of entrenched authoritarianism. Successive generals ruled not with the consent of the governed, but with the confidence of the army's tanks. It was no longer a question of whether another coup would happen, but when. The 1950s were marked by General Plague Phibin Songkram's return to power. Styling himself after European fascists, Phibin launched a campaign of ultranationalism, cultural purification, and suppression of dissent. Under his rule, the Thai identity was forcefully redefined. Citizens were told how to dress, speak, and even what to name their children, all in the name of national unity. Behind this patriotic facade lay deep repression. Political opponents were jailed, leftist academics disappeared, and the press operated under tight military censorship. The army was not just a security force, it became the state itself. In 1957, the pattern repeated. Another coup, led by General Sarit Thanara, ousted Phibin and began a new, brutal chapter. Sarit, with CIA backing during the Cold War, promised moral order. What he delivered was a dictatorship ruled by fear. Sarit's regime declared a state of emergency that lasted for the rest of his life. Parliament was dissolved, political parties banned, and all media placed under strict surveillance. He established the concept of democracy, a fusion of Buddhist righteousness and military command. It was a clever ideological tool that masked authoritarianism as divine order. Under Sarit, dissidents were not just punished, they were executed. In one infamous case, a man accused of spreading communist leaflets was summarily executed without trial. Sarit announced the death via radio as a public warning. It was the first official use of extrajudicial killing as state policy. Fear became law. By the 1960s, Thailand was firmly in the hands of the military elite. Generals rotated power like kings, and each coup was staged under the same pretext: national security. But the real targets were students, workers, farmers, and anyone daring to imagine a democratic Thailand. During this period, American influence grew. The Vietnam War transformed Thailand into a key US ally. American troops used Thai air bases. CIA money flowed freely to support anti-communist operations. But this alliance came with consequences. In exchange for aid, the Thai military crushed internal opposition. Torture centers, blacklists, and psychological warfare became normalized. In the shadows, activists disappeared. In public, fear ruled. The tide began to shift in the early 1970s. University students, inspired by global democratic movements, began to challenge the military regime. They held sit-ins, published underground newspapers, and organized mass protests. The old generals dismissed them at first. But on October 14, 1973, the students mobilized over 200,000 people in Bangkok to demand a constitution and democratic reform. The army responded with force. Tanks rolled into the streets. Bullets tore through unarmed crowds. But this time, the violence backfired. Images of slain students shocked the public. King Bhumibol intervened, and the military junta was forced to resign. It was a rare victory for people power. A brief democratic window opened, yet this victory was fragile. The military bided its time, regrouped in the shadows, and waited for its chance. In 1976, the chance came. Right-wing paranoia surged. Accusations that students were communists and threats to the monarchy grew louder. The media, military, and monarchy aligned to paint activists as enemies of the state. On October 6, 1976, police, military units, and right-wing militias stormed Thammasat University. Dozens of students were massacred, bodies were hung from trees, survivors were tortured in detention. The horror was broadcast live on Thai TV and celebrated by nationalist commentators. That same evening, the military staged yet another coup, claiming the need to restore order. Amnesty was granted to the killers. Once again, impunity prevailed. Through the 1980s, military power took a quieter form. General Prem Tinsalananda governed not as a coup leader, but as a military-appointed prime minister. He maintained the appearance of democracy while keeping ultimate control in army hands. Elections were allowed, but only candidates acceptable to the military were permitted to thrive. Political dissent remained risky. Military surveillance of activists, journalists, and unions remained widespread. Leftist groups were targeted and driven underground. Meanwhile, the armed forces continued to consume vast state resources, growing their budget, businesses, and influence in all areas of life. Then came the 1991 coup. A group of generals ousted the elected government, claiming corruption. They suspended the constitution, banned political parties, and appointed a civilian puppet prime minister. But the people had changed. A new generation of Thais, emboldened by global democratic momentum, rejected the old narrative. When the generals tried to install another military figure after a sham election, the people rose again. In May 1992, massive protests filled the streets of Bangkok. The government responded with lethal force. Soldiers fired into crowds. Helicopters dropped tear gas. Protesters were dragged into vans and disappeared. The event became known as Black May. Dozens were killed. Hundreds were injured or vanished. But this time, the backlash was enormous. King Bhumibol again intervened, and the military was forced to step back. An elected government returned. It seemed like a turning point. The late 1990s and early 2000s offered a glimpse of democratic consolidation. Thailand adopted a progressive constitution in 1997, which enshrined human rights and checks on military power. Civil society expanded. New parties emerged. Political debates flourished. But the shadow of the army never fully lifted. The military never faced accountability for its past crimes. No generals were tried. No truth commission was formed. The culture of impunity endured. That impunity would return with a vengeance in 2006. Amid political conflict and mass protests, the army once again seized power, ousting Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra. Tanks returned to the streets. A military junta suspended the constitution, censored the press, and detained critics. Elections were promised and delayed. Dissenters were branded enemies of the state. The pattern repeated. In 2010, anti-coup protesters known as the Red Shirts held massive rallies in Bangkok demanding the return of democracy. The military cracked down again. Snipers shot protesters from rooftops. Over 90 civilians were killed. The government claimed they were defending public order. Human rights groups called it a massacre. No one was ever prosecuted. Then, in 2014, the military struck again. General Prayuth Chan-o-cha staged Thailand's 12th successful coup. He declared martial law, censored the internet, banned political gatherings, and appointed himself prime minister. A new constitution was written designed to ensure military control even in elections. Dissenters were jailed, academics silenced, students intimidated. The junta portrayed itself as a savior of stability, but it ruled through fear. Throughout this era, Thailand presented itself to the world as a modern nation, a hub for tourism, trade, and diplomacy. But beneath the surface lay a reality of military control, silenced citizens, and normalized human rights violations. The coups were not isolated events, they were a system, a cycle, a method by which the powerful kept power and ensured no reckoning for past crimes. This second part of the story reveals not just the repeated coups, but the human toll they left behind. Behind each takeover lay broken families, dead protesters, censored newspapers, and young people who grew up believing that justice was not for them. Thailand's military coups were never just about politics, they were about power taken through fear, held through silence. In Part 3, we will examine the long-term consequences of this cycle of coups, the ongoing erosion of democracy in Thailand, and the brave voices still resisting in the face of overwhelming odds. From exiled activists to students defying censorship, the fight for Thai democracy is far from over. But the path ahead remains dark unless the truth is faced, and the cycle is finally broken. Part 3. Legacy of Fear. How coups rewired Thailand's democratic future. From the rubble of Black May in 1992, many believed that Thailand had learned its lesson, that the blood spilled would fertilize the roots of true democracy. For a while, it seemed so. Elections resumed, civil society flourished. Prime ministers came from ballots, not barracks. But history, especially in Thailand, is rarely linear. What followed was a series of lessons unlearned and a cycle repeated. Hope, struggle, suppression, repeat. The 1990s saw a cautious expansion of democratic space. The 1997 Constitution, dubbed the People's Constitution, was hailed as the most progressive in Thai history. It offered stronger checks on executive power, improved human rights protections, and opened more channels for public participation. It was a product of collective trauma crafted after the wounds of past coups. But just as Thailand started to move forward, the past struck again. In 2006, a military coup removed Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra, a controversial but elected leader. His populist policies won him support among rural Thais, but he was reviled by urban elites and the military for what they called corruption and authoritarianism. Tanks rolled through Bangkok once more. The generals claimed they were saving democracy. They dissolved the parliament, suspended the constitution, and promised reform. This justification, a coup to protect democracy, had become the default narrative, recycled since 1932. And the people, weary of political instability, often tolerated it. But democracy cannot grow in soil constantly uprooted by boots. The coup of 2006 reignited polarization. Thaksin supporters and detractors clashed. Red shirts and yellow shirts filled the streets. The military's supposed promise of peace instead deepened the divide. Then came 2014. General Prayuth Chan-o-cha led another coup, toppling the elected government of Thaksin's sister, Yingluck Shinawatra. This time, the military stayed longer, ruling for over 5 years. Civil liberties were curtailed, activists jailed, critics silenced. Thailand became a military state once again, this time in the age of smartphones and social media. But repression adapted. The junta passed a new constitution in 2017, one that allowed the military to appoint senators and control future governments even after elections. In essence, they institutionalized their power under a civilian facade. This is how modern coups worked, not just with guns, but with laws. They rewrite the rules of the game to ensure the military never truly loses. The legacy of repeated coups has reshaped Thailand's political DNA. It has normalized intervention. It has made elected governments provisional and generals permanent. It has taught generations of Thai citizens that voting is conditional, that democracy is a gift from the army, not a right. And perhaps most dangerously, it has created a culture of silence and self-censorship. Fear is now embedded. Fear of speaking out. Fear of being labeled un-Thai. Fear of violating the notorious lèse majesté laws, which the junta expanded to target critics under the guise of protecting the monarchy. In schools, students learn civics without dissent. In media, editors know the red lines. On the streets, protests are monitored or preemptively banned. The very idea of protest is viewed not as a right, but as a threat. But resistance still simmers. Young Thais, many of whom grew up under military rule, have begun to push back. In 2020 and 2021, massive youth-led protests rocked Bangkok, demanding democratic reforms, military accountability, and even daring to question royal power once unthinkable. The courage of these youth echoed the spirit of 1973 and 1992. But their context was different. They faced a regime fluent in digital surveillance, backed by deeply rooted institutions. Protest leaders were arrested. Social media was censored. And yet, the movement persisted. These protests signaled a generational shift. While older Thais may accept coups as part of national rhythm, the youth see them as obstacles to the future. They are educated, connected, and increasingly unwilling to accept military dominance. Yet the response remains consistent: suppression. The Thai state, hardened by decades of coups, responds not with dialogue but with crackdown. Tear gas, rubber bullets, and court summonses are its tools of debate. The struggle continues. Thailand stands at a crossroads. The past, with its generals and justifications, continues to cast a long shadow. But the future, if it's to be democratic, must finally break the cycle. That means ending the impunity of coup-makers. It means amending constitutions written at gunpoint. It means fostering a political culture that respects dissent, not punishes it. But it also requires reckoning with the trauma, the lies, and the silences. The coup of 1932 was supposed to be the birth of democracy. Instead, it became the first chapter of a pattern that devoured nearly every hope that followed. That pattern must end. Thailand's future cannot belong to those who seize power in the dark, but to those who dare to build it in the light. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay safe and see you in the next historical video.